Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club. I think we were going to wait just a bit more. I don't know if we have, I think we have a fair number more people with reservations, but we didn't want to wait too long. And so I just introduced myself. My name is James Sims. I'm the president of the club. And then before I go into a very brief introduction for Peter, whom I have known for probably, 20 years on or off. In our, I guess, interactions in Tokyo. As you know, this year is the 70th anniversary of the club, and next month, I guess it's September, right? We will be having our 70th anniversary party at the Palace Hotel, I think starting from about 6:30. And so if people are interested, we can probably provide you more information regarding that, for the members. And if there are any other questions, you can approach me or Yanagi-san, our general manager, regarding that, as well as membership. And so let me go to a brief introduction with our guest today. As you know, Peter Landers is the bureau chief for the combined Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones Newswire's bureau in Tokyo since, I think, February of this year.
February of last year.
Oh, last year. And this is his second stint in Tokyo. And before working at the journal's Tokyo Bureau in 1999, he worked at the Japan Times, the Associated Press, and the now defunct, unfortunately, Far Eastern Economic Review, which many of you probably remember if you've been in Japan or have looked at Asia for any great length of time. And then after the Tokyo Bureau in 99, he returned to the U.S. in 2002 to join the Health and Science Bureau, and later edited many Page One stories as Page One editor and deputy national editor. So Page One editor, that means you also edited what we call the A-heads?
On occasion, yes.
Okay, so the A-heads.
Talk about one of those later.
Okay,
Yes.
so the A-heads, he'll talk about it. It's one of the more lighthearted or more humorous, very popular features in the journal. And it was, I guess, labeled the A-head because it was used to be in the first column.
Right, and the headline is shaped like an A.
Ah, okay.
Or used to be.
Okay, yeah. And then he covered health and science. You were in Washington. Okay, I keep thinking you were in New York. I think I saw you in New York. So you're in Washington? Oh, okay.
Yes.
And so he arrived in Washington just before the election of Barack Obama, and covered a variety of subjects, including justice, energy, and the 2010 healthcare law known as Obamacare. And since returning to Japan, he's been an occasional commentator on TBS's Saturday evening program, Joho 7 Days, newscaster. That's the one with Beito Takeshi. And let's see, Peter is also a graduate of Yale, and with his colleagues, he shared the National Press Foundation's Online Journalism Award for coverage of the Supreme Court's healthcare decision. That was in 2012. And then Society of American Business Editors and Writers for their coverage of the Fukushima accident. And as a sort of a brief note, I remember, I think when I first met Peter, it was probably back in '99. That's when the journal used to have a bureau on the 11th floor of the old Nikkei building in Otemachi, and it was called the Tokuhain Corner, right? Tokuhain Corner, and it was added, I think, to the roof. And so the big concern was, in a big earthquake, that the Tokuhain Corner would probably slide off the building and everybody would die. I think that was the concern, right?
It was a concern.
And then I remember, I don't know, the tower, that wasn't there, was it?
It was.
Okay, and he used to have a stack of meishi that was probably about this high. And he called it the Leaning Tower of what? Meishi? It was about this tall. And I never saw it collapse. I was kind of surprised. I think he maybe glued them together. But then I asked him about it, and he said that he lost the meishi, so when he moved back to the U.S., right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So anyway, just a sort of a interesting aside for today's guest, Mr. Peter Landers, the bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones Newswires.
Thank you. Is this, oh, it is on, okay. I have to speaking to the microphone here. I want to thank the club for inviting me tonight, and it's great to see James again after a few years and a few Meishi gone by the wayside. But I keep these Meishi for a very long time. I have a bad system for organizing them, so if I get your Meishi tonight, I will certainly keep it for a long time. I may have difficulty finding it, so I may have to call the club and and get your email address. And I also want to thank Mr. Yanagi for arranging tonight's lecture, and I look forward to your questions in a little bit. The last time I was here at the FCCJ speaking to an audience, it was in this room almost exactly 14 years ago, and it was actually at my wedding reception, my hiroeng. My wife and I were married several months earlier in the US, and we had a reception here in Japan for our friends in Japan, and my family came out, and my wife's family from Japan came, and it was in this room that I was speaking last. And to explain how long ago that was, it was so long ago that I still had hair up here, and that hair that was here was dark brown. Now, after getting married and having 2 children, I lost the top, and then after working in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, whatever I had left had turned gray. So this is how life has changed for me in the last 14 years. Is my hair is mostly gone, but the journalism world has changed quite a bit over that time too, and so I want to talk today a little bit about how the changes that I've seen over the past quarter century working in journalism, and I'll look to the future and talk a little bit about why I think the so-called mainstream media or established media organizations such as ours, the Wall Street Journal, has a 126-year history, how we still have a lot to offer. And I'll talk a little bit with some bias, of course, about the strengths that our particular mainstream media organization, the Wall Street Journal, has, in my view. And at the end, I'll offer some thoughts on what it takes to get a story into the journal. Some people have asked about that, and what subjects we in the Tokyo Bureau have been interested in recently. So I want to start with some news from our home front, our print edition here in Tokyo. Let me stand up for a moment and show what I mean. Our print edition in Asia has just gotten a lot bigger. It's what we call a broadsheet. Previously, it was a tabloid size, maybe the size of Yukon Fuji in Japan, or New York Post, if you're familiar with that. But just as of yesterday, this is a brand new development. As of yesterday, we've returned to the broadsheet size. And there are 2 key points about this new print edition of the journal. One is that there's about 50% more news than the previous Asian edition, because the number of pages is about the same, but the pages are simply bigger, so there's more news. And the other is that it's the exact same format as our flagship U.S. edition. That's the paper that you see if you're traveling in the U.S., and the content is largely the same too, allowing for some differences, the time zone, of course, and late breaking news developments, and some regional emphasis, a few more Asian stories in the Asian edition, more European stories in the Europe edition, but basically it's the same product around the world, and we call it one journal. And the product is going to look similar pretty much wherever you go. A lot of people in Japan have told me over the years, going back to in the 1990s when I was in the old Nikkei building, and people would call thinking that we were the subscription office, and we were not. But I would answer the questions. I'd say, well, at that time you could subscribe to the Asian edition in Tokyo, or you could get the U.S. edition by mail. Our website was not really marketed at that time in Japan, and people invariably said, I want to see the U.S. edition. I want to see the same edition that my colleagues and competitors in the U.S. Are seeing. And we listen to those voices, and the result is this. It's not, as I say, it's not exactly the same, but many of the stories are the same. The layout is the same, and it's pretty close to what we have in the U.S. And I have a bunch of copies here, so I think anyone who wants one, I'll stack them up on the table, or maybe I'll pass them out now. I'll put some over. Got a big stack of this today, so I hope there's almost enough for printing out copies. Any other? Thank you.
Just passing or distributing it one for each?
There's two sections in this Asian edition. Having passed around our print edition, I should say that the print is not, of course, our only product, or even, I would say, our most important product at this stage. I'd say really our website, WSJ.com, and the mobile website and the mobile app are really our core product. And we also have a print edition. About 50% of our internet traffic comes from mobile nowadays. And we've just also launched a mobile app called What's News. It's only for subscribers, and it's for the busy person who wants to see the top 10 stories at that moment. Just kind of get a quick overview of the news. You don't have time to look at the full website. You're a subscriber, you can look at the full website, but you want a quick overview, and that's what this app called What's News aims to deliver. As James mentioned, we also have Dow Jones Newswires, which is our real-time news service that has a rich stream of headlines and breaking market analysis. And the Tokyo Bureau that I oversee provides copy for both the Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com, and Dow Jones Newswires. So moving back again to the changes that I've seen, I started my reporting career. I was at the Japan Times, but I started as a reporter at a wire service at the Associated Press, and Kimura-san and I were often on the morning shift or on the evening shift, working late hours. I was the editor, he was a reporter, and so it brings back good memories to see him here today. And looking back to those days, it's hard to believe the number of American daily newspapers that had bureaus and full-time correspondents in Tokyo. The Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Boston Globe, even the Baltimore Sun had a full-time Tokyo correspondent. And it's common, all of those are closed down now, it's common to lament what was lost when all those bureaus disappeared, but I would place the emphasis a little bit differently on what has been gained. For example, people had hardly heard of Bloomberg in those days. It was a tiny outfit. Today, they have an enormous bureau here, many times the size of our bureau, and doing a lot of great journalism. Reuters has expanded with more investigative journalism muscle. And so much translated material from the Japanese press is available online to readers around the globe. So I would say compared to those days, anyone who wants to be informed about Japan now has a much easier time of it. And we have so many more opportunities as journalists to make an impact with our stories. And I'll give an example. Shortly after I joined the Journal in 1999, a colleague of mine wrote a story about a musical composer who writes the very short tunes of about 7 seconds that you hear at the train station when you're about to get on the train. You know, the ba-da-da-da-dum-bum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, like that. And then just as soon as the door closes, the tune goes off. Now, anybody who reads that story would undoubtedly want to know how these tunes sound. And we had no way to show them. I should mention, by the way, that this story was one of the A-heads that James talked about, the kind of offbeat, funny story on page 1. So there was no attachment. You can read the story online today, but there's no attachment, no sound clip, no video, no way to hear this. And if we did that today, we would be laughed at if we didn't propose a video. I mean, I would get yelled at by my supervisors. Where's the video? You have to have a video. And in fact, our Tokyo Bureau has been doing a lot of video work. Some people may not associate that with the Wall Street Journal, but it's almost one of our core products, I would say. The main U.S. television networks have trimmed their presence here, and we don't have the skills or the equipment that they do, but we we're quicker, we're more nimble, and we can still, I think, inform and entertain. So in that vein, I wanted to show one or two of our videos that we've created in the Tokyo Bureau since I got here. This one is this went with another A-head about Ibos, the Sony robot dog that Sony has stopped supporting with new parts. So owners get together and share some of their old parts and some of their knowledge to keep their Ibos alive. They're at risk of dying. So here.
Remember these guys? They're called Ibos. Sony produced about 150,000 of the robotic dogs from 1999 to 2006, and they developed quite a following in Japan. Tatsuo Matsui met his future wife at an Aibo gathering in Kyoto in 2001.
Because she is shy, we created a story that my Aibo and her Aibo got married, which spontaneously led to our marriage.
When the couple tied the knot 3 years later, they dressed up their dogs as a traditional Japanese bride and groom. But can the Aibo survive? Sony shut down all of its Aibo maintenance services last year, part of a cost-cutting effort in its troubled electronics branch. The company says it ended the service because it was running out of spare parts, so owners have to fend for themselves. Some of them meet up at a weekly support group in Kawasaki so they can help each other with repairs.
When I learned that Sony would stop customer support, I started collecting broken ones for replacement parts. I now have about 50, including broken ones. Eventually, they will be broken, but I'd like to keep their current conditions as long as possible, by replacing parts or fixing on my own.
The robots may be getting harder to restore, but that's not stopping loyal owners like Matsui, whose 15-year-old Aibo is still kicking. He says the little dog has become a permanent part of the family.
This is a robot that changed my life.
And I'll show one more video. It's oops, let's see here, excuse me.
So if Mom asks what's the biggest news at the Frankfurt Auto Show, you can tell her that Porsche announced
If you're in a
that
hurry,
every
this
major
train
model that it
might be the ticket. Japan's magnetic levitation, or maglev, bullet train has gone as fast as 600 kilometers per hour in test runs. Railway company JR Central is spending some $45 billion to build a maglev line from Tokyo to Nagoya. It's set to open in 2027, traveling 286 kilometers in just 40 minutes. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants the U.S. to use Japan's maglev technology on the New York to Washington stretch, where an Amtrak train derailed in May. Japan invited Maryland Governor Larry Hogan this week to take a test ride on the maglev.
It was an incredible experience, even more impressive than I expected it to be. Seeing is believing.
Bullet trains like this Shinkansen have been part of Japanese life for more than a half-century, but the huge cost has deterred the U.S. Many in Mr. Hogan's Republican Party don't like big train projects. The train may be fast, but U.S. decision-making probably won't be.
We'll get to networking and parties in a moment. But my point is that it's kind of an adventure for us, and we can be a little bit of a disruptor. We get disrupted sometimes by new entrants in the market, but at a time when not many media outlets are producing videos about Japan. Nobody else from CBS or NBC was at that maglev train event or covering the Aibo. We can offer something a little extra and special because we do have a presence in Tokyo. As I mentioned, in our home market of the U.S., there are a lot of new challengers that we face, sites like Vox.com or Quartz that try to explain the news. NBC Universal has invested or agreed to invest $200 million in BuzzFeed, a website, and this deal values the BuzzFeed, according to the Wall Street Journal, at $1.5 billion, which is more than the Nikkei paid for the Financial Times. There's the Huffington Post, Business Insider, and other sites that rack up big traffic, and many of them do good work. But what they don't have is anybody here in Japan, boots on the ground, experienced reporters trying to find out new things. Let me offer the example of the robot maker Fanuc. This is a company with a market capitalization, a Jikasogaku, of about 4 trillion yen, more than $30 billion. And you can analyze that from afar, but there's nothing like visiting and seeing it in person. And that's what our reporter, Eric Fanner and Chieko Tsuneoka did. They went out to Yamanashi Prefecture. Eric wrote in his story that scores of bright yellow robots at this factory toil away 24 hours a day, replicating themselves, watched over by a handful of human workers. They build more robots and other factory machinery. And he interviewed the famously secretive company and the CEO of the company, Mr. Inaba, who explained why he tends to keep so many secrets about the company. He said, business is like war with rules. To disclose information such as what kind of products are sold and how profitable they are is, if I may say so, like letting your enemy know how many tanks, aircraft, or troops are mobilized in which theater. So this is something, this is the kind of interview and color from the factory that you can't get by sitting in New York. I'll offer one more example, the messaging app Line, which I know many people in Japan use. It's a company that if it ever went public, it could be a multi-billion-dollar event, but there was a lot of interest in when that IPO, initial public offering, might happen. And it took 5 of our reporters to nail down, in fact, that the IPO had been scrapped. It was not happening, and partly because the company is not yet profitable. This was a scoop from the Journal, and when I say it took these 5 people to nail it down, the initial tip came to one person, but it takes that kind of staffing to know that we have it right, to be confident that the Wall Street Journal can confidently say this is the truth. And also to make sure that we're fair to all the parties in the story and they have a chance to comment. So that's what the Wall Street Journal stands for. And I don't mean to say we're the only organization to have scoops or to deliver analysis that on-the-scene journalism can produce. I mean that just that the number of English language organizations in Tokyo and in other capitals around the world is quite small. In Tokyo, you might say it's us, Bloomberg, as I mentioned, Reuters, the FT, a few trade publications for specific industries, and perhaps a few others. And I apologize if I'm leaving anybody important out. But the point is that it's not a big group. The new websites may have more people in a place like Washington, but even then, in my experience as assistant bureau chief in our Wall Street Journal Washington bureau, when our reporter was probing sources at the Federal Communications Commission to find out how President Obama would change internet regulation, he rarely ran into competitors from BuzzFeed or Vox.com. The competitors were the same names pretty much: Bloomberg, Reuters, New York Times, and Washington. Politico, that's actually a fairly new web-based organization, but it does have the traditional news-breaking values. And so this is why I say that the mainstream media has a lot of value to offer. We also have a responsibility and a business imperative to keep investing to make sure we're delivering information to customers in the way that they want it. At the Journal, for example, we did have an app for the iPhone at one point that, to be honest, did not work too well. It took a long time to load. And believe me, we heard about that. We've made it faster, more responsive, but that we do have that responsibility. We don't have any guaranteed audience anymore. We have to make sure that we're always keeping up with our readers and staying ahead of what they want. Most of the companies I just named charge a hefty sum for our products. Most of us offer some content free, but if you want everything, you have to pay. An annual Wall Street Journal subscription for an individual runs to about 30,000 yen, some buying, or about $300. And people ask, when so much on the internet is free, why pay so much for a subscription? And here I come back to the importance of quality content, the value that even a small edge, a small advantage, a little piece of information can bring. Let's say, for example, you're in the car business in Japan. Now, in my view, car companies face an existential threat from the rise of self-driving cars, cars with new technology, new entrants such as Apple, Google, and Tesla. And if there is an Apple car, I know the people in the US and Japan who buy Apple products, they're the same people who drive Toyotas and Hondas. And if an Apple car is on the market, you know, every car that they sell is going to be taking away from Toyota or Honda. And people say, well, those companies, they're just experimenting. They're not really going to get into the car business. And so I brought our headline from today's paper. You know, if you say, well, it's just they're just experimenting. This is not a real threat. Well, here's a headline from today's edition. Google brings in chief for self-driving cars. And we had this a day ahead of our competition. This is from our U.S. reporters. It says, the beginning of the story says that Google is ready to turn its self-driving car technology into a business and has hired an auto industry veteran from Hyundai and Ford to run their auto business. So it's no longer just fun and games. They're getting serious. And in my view, there's an inadequate sense of crisis at Japanese automakers. And one reason, frankly, is that I believe they're not reading our website and the website of other companies that are reporting, other organizations that are reporting developments like this. Here's another headline from today. German car parts makers see bigger role in technology. And this story says that Bosch and Continental ZF Friedrichshafen are expanding into mega suppliers able to leverage new technologies for all vehicle parts. And here's the news. They've started working closely with U.S. technology giants like Google. And the free outlets, eventually, you know, maybe a few hours later, the next day, they may match our story. They may have some of the elements that we had. But when so much is on the line and your time is limited, where is the sense in going with what is something that's late, second best, not as comprehensive, not as authoritative, maybe less experienced reporters? And I'm saying it's not just Wall Street Journal that produces this content. There are others as well that mostly, as I said, are paid. And I think, again, when time is short, the value of these websites and news organizations will become apparent, and is apparent. Let me point out a combination of three traits about the Wall Street Journal that I don't think any other organization quite has all three in the same place. First is a focus that we've been stressing increasingly on our core subjects of business, finance, technology, economics, global geopolitics. I was in the U.S. working in New York when News Corporation, led by Rupert Murdoch, bought the Journal in 2007, and I think there was a shift. Everybody thinks of the Wall Street Journal as a business paper because of the name, Wall Street. And I think Rupert felt that maybe we were ignoring some general news too much. We were letting big stories pass by just because they didn't have a direct business impact. And we've moved to fill that gap. And now if there's a terrorist act someplace, we certainly cover that. We don't say, well, it's in the desert in Egypt. There's no Toyota factory there. We won't cover it. Of course, we cover that kind of thing. Maybe we went a little bit too far in that direction. And in any case, recently, our editor-in-chief, Jerry Baker, who himself was a Tokyo correspondent for the Financial Times many, many years ago. And I should mention that the chief executive of News Corp, Robert Thompson, is also a former Tokyo correspondent. So we have some Japan hands at the top.
He's also a former member.
Former member. I wanted to say that. I wasn't 100% sure.
And he served on a committee here as well.
So. Okay, former FCCJ member Robert Thompson is our CEO. So we have some very top management with an interest in Japan. But anyway, especially Jerry Baker, our editor-in-chief, has been stressing, yes, we do general news, but our core, what readers come to us, what they pay that money for is really our coverage of business and finance and technology, more so than a general interest newspaper. Now, second, in comparison to Bloomberg and Reuters, which also have a business and financial focus, our DNA is in a consumer product going back more than 100 years. The website and the newspaper read by millions of people. That's our core rather than a terminal that is used by a narrow set of financial professionals. The Wall Street Journal has always been a product that can be read by any educated person who knows English or now Japanese. And I say that because we have a Japanese language website. We call it Wall Street Journal Nihonban, jp.wsj.com. That translates most of our best articles into Japanese in real time. This is a site that started in late 2009, so we're about 6 years old. Now, I should mention the website is not my responsibility. We have a separate editor, a managing editor of the Japanese language website, George Nishiyama, formerly of Reuters, who is a very experienced journalist in both English and Japanese. So if you're not sure, you can read that Google article that I just mentioned. Google brings in chief for self-driving cars. We have the same article on our Japanese website. I think it's right here, actually. Here it is, Google 自動運転部門、自動運転者部門トップに業界ベテラン企業. So it's the same article in Japanese, and a lot of people use that to refer to that. Some people like to use the feature where you can look at the English language counterpart to this story. It's a good learning tool for English, among other things. So it's a very useful website. So I mentioned two things, our focus on business, our consumer heritage, and the third thing is that while we have journalists from many countries, and of course posted to many countries, we are proudly US-based, and we offer a home perspective on what is still the world's largest economy and its center of innovation. So I think anyone in business in Japan, you can ignore many places, but you have to understand the United States. And probably China as well, I would say now. And there, too, we have excellent and fearless coverage. So I've talked tonight about some of the changes in the media landscape, the value that long-standing media outlets with boots on the ground can bring, and some of the traits that I think make our products special. And I've also discussed the responsibility and the pressure that we feel, honestly, to keep our product constantly in tune with the latest technology to make sure that we're not overtaken by competitors. So as I look to the future, I think most of us who are leaders in business journalism will be surrounded by these new competitors that keep us on our toes. But I think we plan to stay relevant and essential. So let me conclude by trying to touch on some answers to questions I've heard from people who have asked what kinds of stories appeal to the Wall Street Journal in Tokyo these days and what topics we find interesting recently. One thing we like, this is, as I've perhaps made clear already, is exclusives. We like forward-looking stories that tell us what's coming next. I think especially nowadays in this very competitive world, it's again, Jerry Baker, our editor-in-chief, has stressed the importance of scoops because that's one element of the value that we offer to customers who are paying for our product. Some representatives of a car company visited us recently and said, we have a great story to tell about our new system for production, new way of making cars that's more efficient. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. When is this system going to be introduced? Actually, we started it in 2006, and we've been working on it for the past few years. So it turned out it was not so new after all. A lot of companies, they do a big deal, maybe an acquisition overseas, and then maybe 6 months later they come to us and say, wouldn't you like to write about our big new acquisition in the United States? And we usually say, well, we covered that at the time. What's new? Well, nothing's really new, but we thought you might want to write about it. And the answer is usually no. We want to know what you're planning next. Tell us your next move. I think companies in Japan tend to feel that it's safer to talk about things that are over and done with, that have already been reported in the Nikkei a lot. But that is not what is going to add value for our readers. Our stories are balanced. We try to give multiple perspectives. Many companies in Japan, I think, are scared that if they open up to the Wall Street Journal, we might say something bad about them. And they're probably right that the story is going to include some critics' views or competitors' views, someone who says maybe the new product isn't so great after all. The problem is that if you try to avoid all bad publicity, you may get no publicity, period. And for some companies, that's okay. For Fanuc, it was okay for 43 years. But eventually, I think it helps if your customers and if the world at large knows who you are, even if not everything printed about you is positive. Personally, I like stories about companies facing new challenges and doing something new to win. New technologies. We've written about Sony. We did a page one story about Sony, which has had its troubles recently, as we all know, but a very successful part of the iPhone. You may know that the iPhone 6 has two high-quality cameras for the selfie generation. One camera that faces out, the other that faces in, if you're taking a picture of yourself or with your family. And it's very important to camera makers to have very high-quality cameras. And the key part of that camera is a sensor made by Sony. And Apple cannot do without that Sony sensor. Sony invited us to visit their sensor factory, one of the factories in Kyushu. And we had an interview with Mr. Hirai, the CEO, and we put together a nice story about how they're beginning to come back thanks to this new product. We want to hear about changes in Japan, how Japan does business, about womenomics, and of course, Abenomics is a huge theme for us. I think it's near a standstill right now. I've used the word ippukukan in Japanese. Kind of feels like it had revved up and got to a certain point, and now we're sort of a little bit stalled. And what we're asking right now is, where does Abenomics go next? Mr. Abe talks about the three arrows: fiscal reform, monetary stimulus, and structural reform. And I think all three, you could call them engines. I might prefer to call them engines. And all of those engines are a little bit not revved up. They're not fully firing at the moment. So this is an area that we're watching closely. I could go on, but I want to leave room for some questions. And I know that we're going to have a networking event afterwards. So to show that the Wall Street Journal offers the news that you can use, this is another story that was just published a few hours ago, the smartest ways to network at a party. And this article says that, if people are in a tight circle talking to each other and laughing loudly, maybe that's not the right group to approach. They may be having fun among themselves. They don't welcome a newcomer. Whereas if someone is sort of standing at a table and facing out, that means maybe they're ready to talk to someone new. So the journal is multifaceted. We have lots of different kinds of articles, and the smartest ways to network at a party is one of them. Some of you may want to ask also about the Nikkei's acquisition of the FT. I'd be glad to talk about that or anything else. And I thank you for your attention and for coming tonight.
Okay, thank you. I guess one thing I would add is that, from my experience over the last 20 years, is that the journal always had, even the reporters that were sent from overseas, they always spoke and read the language, which was very different, I think, from the other major media outlets, especially the newspapers. That was my impression. But
I think that's right. We have one fine reporter in our bureau, Eric Fanner, who's our senior corporate correspondent, who does not speak Japanese. He came here with his wife, who works at The Economist, and so we have some staff to help him out when he needs a translation. Yeah. But yes, on the whole, reporters speak Japanese. Yes. Yeah, but I think that's been the case ever since I was. Yeah, has long been the case. So, yes. which was always, I thought, a big, sharp contrast with the other, newspapers. So anyway, with that sort of plug, I'd like to go to questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Oh, Goto-san. Oh, if you'd come up to the mic and then just state your name and I guess affiliation and.
Mitsuya Goto. I met you on January 21st, 1998. when our club had the farewell party for Nick, Christoph, and Cheryl Woodon.
Oh, my goodness.
But anyway, I'm glad to see you again. The question I have, I've been coming to this club since 1969. Question I want to ask you is, years ago, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation bought out the Wall Street Journal. What changes you have seen for better or for worse?
That's a great question. I was in the room when I attended the final shareholder meeting of Dow Jones and Company as an independent company in New York, and we walked back. It was at a hotel across the street from our headquarters. We walked back across the street, and that afternoon, Rupert came into the newsroom and stood on some packages of paper, I think, that were next to the copy machine, and delivered his direction for the paper. I think on the good side that he has brought somewhat more focus on general news to make sure that our website is comprehensive. He and the people that he hires like I think shorter, punchier stories. The front page has gotten a lot newsier than it used to be. When I started at the Journal, the front page didn't actually have any news on it, which was sort of an antiquated tradition. It had the news summary, which we call What's News, but it didn't have any news stories. Whereas today, the lead story in the paper is obviously a news story. China unveils state sector reform. So I think we've gotten newsier, we've gotten punchier, we've gotten quicker to the punch when news breaks. Of course, these are changes that have happened in the industry as a whole. So how much can be attributed to Rupert, and how much can be attributed just to the changes that we all must adapt to is open to question. I was in Washington for 5 years, and I think. Of course, it's well known that Rupert Murdoch is on the conservative, somewhat of a maverick, but generally conservative side. I don't think our political, we've always been a down-the-middle paper. We don't have the editorial pages are, of course, conservative, but there's a high wall between the editorial pages that write opinion journalism and those of us on the news side who are covering the news. And on the news side, we've always been middle of the road. We don't take a strong political stance. And that has not changed much under Rupert. The one thing I did experience in Washington was, I guess, more of an effort to be sure that we were giving a voice to the conservative side in a story, not to have a story where it was just Democrats or liberals talking the whole time without, even if we profile, for example, I think in Tuesday's U.S. Page One, there's a story about Bernie Sanders, the Democratic presidential candidate. And we analyze how much his program would cost. He wants universal health insurance. He calls himself a democratic socialist. We estimate that his program, if implemented in the U.S., would cost $17 trillion over 10 years. That's about Nisen Choen, something like that. A very expensive program. Anyway, the point is, I think it's a fairly sympathetic look at his program and why it might be a good deal for America, what he advocates, or why he advocates it. But we also include in there a quote from a Republican economist. And maybe in the old days we wouldn't have done that, but now we're sure to include the perspective of a Republican economist who, of course, feels that it would be a disaster for the United States if a socialist were elected president. But basically, I think the quality has not changed, and the political, we continue not to have a political slant one way or the other. We continue to be down the middle.
Any other questions? Okay, there you go. I think the other thing is, I think after Murdoch came in, or Uncle Rupert, as I used to call him, that's when they started the Japanese language edition too, right? Because there was an expansion in Tokyo when most of the other, I think, media outlets had been shrinking.
That's right. Yeah, he was. I mean, aggressive in expanding internationally, and that's even today we see that with these new international editions that modeled after the U.S. edition.
Right. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kyota Narimatsu. I'm head of the corporate communications at Barclays. I noticed that you changed the size of the paper, and it used to be probably beginning of this week, I guess, if I remember.
That's right.
Yeah, because I'm putting the papers on our desk, and just curious to know because a number of media who is moving to online, but still you're sticking on to publishing in paper. And if I remember correctly, some of the there is no paper dailies in the San Francisco area. Correct me if I'm wrong, but direction is moving. That's moving to paper to online. But still, it seems that you have committed to deliver the news on papers, which is people like me who has been in the business community for a long period of time. But probably it doesn't. Probably the practice is changing for the young generation. So that's one thing. If I are allowed to the second questions, how do you see the curation media? There is some local curation media like a Newspicks, or even a Huffington Post could be categorized like a curation media. How do you compete? And what's the landscape of media industry, in the future, in your view? Thank you.
First, on the print edition, I think you're right. I was a little surprised to see us investing money in improving our print product, but I think we feel that it does have some life to it. When my kids are my age, will they be reading a print newspaper? Probably not. This is purely my personal prediction, but maybe print has another 10, 15, 20 years to go, something like that. That would be my prediction. But that's still, even if it's the short end of that prediction, 10 years, that's still 10 years when print is a big part of our revenue. And in some sense, it's easier nowadays to have a global edition like this with improved technology. So I guess the decision was that, and I think, frankly, the tabloid, previously, as you know, the Asian and European editions were published on tabloid. I found them easy to read, but I think it didn't look great. It looked like the New York Post or Yukon Fuji, or Bild in Germany, or the Sun in England. It just did not have that that sort of classiness that the broadsheet does. That's one thing, and it also was missing a lot of the content of the U.S. edition, which, as I said, I think people here really want. So, not just here, but around the world. So, I think there was, a thought that let's give it one more try to really improve our global print product. Focus our resources a little bit more on the biggest cities in the world, and Tokyo is one of those. I think we're focusing in particular on 15 cities around the world, of which Tokyo is one, and try to keep up our circulation and expand it in those capitals. And the other thing, one more thing, is it is a great advertisement for our website too. So you see it on the newsstand, even if you're no longer a print reader. I think having it out there on the streets in these major capitals is still a valuable investment. And I'm sorry, give me a tip on your second question. Oh yes, the curation sites. Yes, I must say I don't read the Japanese curation sites very much. Like what is it, Smart News? I don't see them very much. There are some sites. There are no.
You do understand the concept of it, right?
Yes,
absolutely. Some of the outputs from produced by other media or some writings. rather than creating their own content.
That's right, and the U.S. doesn't have anything exactly like Smart News, but the concept, as you say, of curation or of gathering other people's, I think I'm channeling, trying to guess what the bosses would say if they were here. I think what they would say is we need to be, as the journal, we feel we need to be very careful about giving our content to these websites because it diminishes our brand. If the Wall Street Journal is next to Yahoo News or Huffington Post, or just part of a jumble of news sources that some of which are reliable, some of which are not. It's kind of like if you wear an Hermes tie with cheap clothing from secondhand clothing from a used clothing store. I mean, of course, some people are so good that they can actually make the tie look better in that circumstance. But in general, I think Hermes wants their tie next to their suit and next to their shirt and with their shoes and with their briefcase. They don't want their fancy tie mixed up with cheaper stuff or stuff of unknown provenance from other people. And that's the way we would feel about our content, that we want you to pay for it. First of all, most of these sites are free. We want you to pay for it, and we also want you to recognize the value of it and it to be in a context where that value will become clear. So I think in general, we've taken a cautious view towards aggregation or curation sites.
I was wondering why the broad margin? Is that to keep the ink off your hands, or or is it to so you can take notes?
You can certainly do both. It is good for taking notes. It is good for keeping the ink off your hands. The truth is that because of the printing requirements in Japan, we have to have a little more white space in the margins than we would like. It's not perfect, but I think it's perhaps for some people it's easier to read with the white space for people who take notes, and hopefully it's not for those who don't take notes. It's still not a huge barrier, but there is some unique characteristics both in Japan actually and South Korea too that make it difficult to print. Our U.S. paper is narrower. So,
right. That's right.
And so when as I said, we're trying to get as close as possible to the U.S. Layout. It's the same really, and so in Japan.
I remember the U.S. got much narrower at one point because it used to be much broader.
Used to be more like this.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sorry. Any other questions? If not, we can, I guess, go. Oh, there's a question back here. Oh, a gentleman. Yes.
My name is Ted Kano from Wacom Corporation in Japan, based in Tokyo and Saitama. Thank you very much for the interesting story. I think the broad print version, I like that very much, and would like to read that pretty often. My question is that I was sort of impressed with the story about Google, and Japan used to be the second largest economy in the world, and manufacturing sort of led the way for the growth of Japan in the past. And recently, especially for the electronics business, Japan's companies are, trailing behind Korean and Chinese guys. And there is a sort of a story that Japan's manufacturing business is going down, but the auto business seems to be fine. But like Google, there is still, the threat that Japan may be overtaken by those guys, or usurped by the IT guys for the auto as well. And if you pick up some of the area that Japan can lead or Japan can spearhead the global economy in a way, I'd like to hear that. And I had this opportunity to talk with the high school student earlier today. That still there are a lot of students who aspire to be engineers or scientists after graduating school. So I'd like to see, I said to them that there are several possibilities. There are various possibilities that they can achieve after graduating universities. But I'd like to know what with your vast experience in Japan and broad insight in the global economy, I would like to hear what do you think.
That's a great question. As I mentioned, I think Japan does have huge strength in certain manufacturing areas today, not just cars, but all the electronic parts. And we've tried, since I got here, I've tried to encourage our reporters to do more stories on companies like Murata Seisakusho, the Sony sensor business, and a few others, where the Japanese manufacturing technology is still the best in the world. The iPhone can't be built without these companies. And I think that position seems to be pretty secure. The problem is that there's only so far you can go to support the entire country, an entire nation on iPhone parts and Samsung parts. And as you say, the automobile business is another, of course, a big strength for Japan. I think it can expand again with the cheap yen. If the yen stays at 120, I think you could have more cars built in Japan and new factories being built here to take advantage of Japan's skill in manufacturing. Robotics is another area where I think Japan still is among the leaders, and certain aspects of it. As I mentioned, we did write about FANUC, which is another supplier to Apple. In a sense, they've supplied the machines that make parts for the iPhone. I think, and I'm not saying anything new here, but where Japan may fall a little short at the moment is in the programming and the software. That's always been the case to some extent, but the next generation of cars, I think it's a problem for Japanese parts makers. They may make the most precisely engineered part in the world, but if the future of the car is the software that tells you and not even necessarily a self-driving car. It could be a car that's driven by a human, but in the future, probably all cars will be required to have collision avoidance technology. Some kid runs out into the street, maybe you don't see them, but the car does, and it will automatically stop. That's not really it's partly hardware, but it's largely software, and that's where I think Japan is not. It's not a lost cause, but clearly. From what I hear, I just had lunch yesterday with some people in the auto industry. They said we're not getting enough software engineers coming out of universities to fill that demand. And so it's not over yet, but that's an important area to improve, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this will, I guess, be the last question then.
Thank you for your presentation, Peter. My name is Jiro Abe, associate member here. You touched upon a little bit on relationship between Nikkei and FT. Do you think this relationship boost up the media industry, or is that a sort of a very strong competitor to your company? That's my question. Thank you.
That's a good question. Both the FT and the Nikkei are, in a sense, competitors for our company. Certainly, the FT, as the main international among the international business newspapers and websites, FT is probably the closest to the journal. That's why I stressed a moment ago our U.S. roots, because I think we do give more. We just have more people in the U.S., more insights, more sort of local knowledge of the U.S. Market, and that's an important element for business readers. So the FT has always been a threat. The Nikkei, of course, has so many scoops. Most of them are correct, and they're certainly a competitor for our Japanese language site. We think we have unique stories that can't be found on the Nikkei, but I'm sure the Nikkei would disagree with that and say that their site has everything that an international business person who reads Japanese would have. We make the argument that you also need JWSJ, Woroshichana Nihonban. So I think they're strong competitors. I don't think either of them will change significantly in the next few years. FT will continue to be independent, continue to be a threat. The Nikkei will continue to be a threat. I hear that they're not planning to run Nikkei stories in the FT. If they were, that would be a problem for me as a Wall Street Journal Tokyo bureau chief, because I think it would bring a bigger audience for the Nikkei scoops that sometimes are not noticed overseas. So I actually hope they don't do that. Maybe one day they'll change their mind about that, and that be a problem for me or my successor. But the one, what would I say? If I had one note of skepticism about the Nikkei and the FT, I would say that there is such a cultural difference between not even comparing journalism in the UK and journalism in the US, and seeing some of the different. Our editor-in-chief, Jerry Baker, is English, and I've worked with many journalists from the UK over the years, and there's a big difference even between those two cultures. Then you compare the UK and Japan, it's just it's a different world. And for the moment, I don't think that's a problem. Maybe someday in the future, when important decisions need to be made in Japan about the FT, maybe they have a new editor or some crisis or some problem, because these things happen over the years. That's when I could imagine that the Japanese bosses in Tokyo and the FT staff in London may not see things the same way. But I don't think that's going to be a problem right away. I think it's more of a long-term issue.
Yeah, at one point, actually, Dow Jones and Nikkei used to have a joint newsroom in the old Nikkei building.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And so there was a tie-up between the two, and I remember, they're very different views, at least at that time, between like Dow Jones and Nikkei in terms of some of the coverage. So, but that was in a joint newsroom. So, anyway,
let me throw in one more. I'm sorry, I've probably been too. One new role for journalists nowadays is also to be a salesman. I hope I wasn't too much of a salesman today, but I'll offer one more sales pitch. We actually have a relationship with the Nikkei ourselves. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. Yes, here it is. And you may have even seen an advertisement in the Nikkei. Dow Jones has an information service called Factiva. It's a database of articles from thousands of publications. And the Nikkei has Nikkei Telecom, which is mostly a database of Japanese language news sources, including all of the Nikkei publications. And just this month, we announced a new tie-up. We call it Nihon Kara Sekai e, Nihon Kara Sekai o, Sekai Kara Nihon o. So you can subscribe to Nikkei's database and our own Factiva database, in sort of a set price. And Nikkei is doing most of the marketing of this new combined product. So although the Nikkei just bought the FT, on this one particular product, they also have a relationship with us, and I think it's a good relationship that will benefit both sides.
Okay. On the note, I think we'll probably go to what the bar will be opening up, and then we'll have some light hors d'oeuvres. So anyway, thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you in the club. I think you have a membership here, right? Transferred from Jake?
Transferred from Jake, coming up, yes.
Oh, okay.
Coming up.
So we can get that through. So hopefully we'll see you here at some other point. And then I guess we have probably another hour to basically sort of mingle, and if you have a chance to introduce yourself to Peter, or if there are other people that you want to meet. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.